Very good afternoon. This is Business Live with Darren McCaffrey. Thanks for joining us on this Thursday. Figures out today show that net migration to the UK hit a record high of more than 900,000 in the year to June 2023. Net migration is the difference between the number of people who arrive and leave the UK. So data for the Office for National Statistics puts the figure at 906,000 in the year ending to June last year, though it has dropped since then. Let's get all the details, all the figures from our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, who's been doing a deep dive for us. Ed.
Yeah, Darren, it's quite a complex story, but in some senses, normally we start off by giving you the big number, the latest big number here. But this time, I want to start by giving you a little bit of the history, actually, because this is quite instructive here. A year ago, this is the picture that the Office for National Statistics gave us on net migration, OK? So the total people coming in minus those going out. And the point this time last year was, look, it's starting to fall. Then more data came in. So more data came in. They updated their figures for this same period and said, well, listen, it's still falling, but it went up a little bit higher than we previously thought it did. Now look at the latest numbers. So the ones we got out this morning. And it was a dramatic change, a really dramatic change in the history. And while theoretically they're falling, and actually falling quite sharply, there are some kind of legitimate questions over, well, can we actually believe that? Because if you look back to this period, so this is a year ago, and in this kind of latest period, the year to June 2023, the ONS was saying, well, back then, the net migration was 672,000, and it was kind of coming down already. This time we learned over the same period, OK, so we're talking about the same period. Actually, it wasn't 672,000, it was 906,000, and it was barely coming down at all. You see the issue here? And if we just kind of dissect why that's happening. So last year, and you said at the start, Darren, net migration is immigration, those coming in, that's that bit there, minus those leaving the country, so emigration there. And what's happened here is two things. First of all, they've looked at the numbers, they've realised actually there's more people that have come into the country than they previously thought. So that goes up, 140,000 more people coming in. At the same time, fewer people going out. OK, so take those two things together, and that explains why the number is a lot bigger. And when I say a lot bigger, it's historic. We've never seen net migration as high as it has just hit. And I've said that quite a few times, and each time it's been correct because they've revised it up. This is showing you recent history in immigration, OK? And what you can get a sense of from this, and it's really the big picture we're looking at, is back before COVID, before critically, the new post-Brexit rules came into force on migration. This is how things looked. It was quite kind of stable. Note that it was EU people who were by far and away the biggest immigration force. But now look at what happened afterwards. So Brexit rules came in. People from the EU didn't come in as much. So you've got immigration from the EU dropping down to historic lows. People from outside the EU went up to historic highs. We have never, either from the EU or from outside the EU, seen that line as high as it has been recently. Never. And when you're looking at the countries that we're talking about, OK, so which countries, which nationalities, it's people from India. So it's Indians, it's Nigerians, it's Chinese, it's Pakistanis. And if you're looking at the quantum here to just get a sense of, how normal or abnormal is this? Well, this line here is showing you the Polish net migration, which was obviously a big moment for the UK between 2001 and 2011. So that's 10 years. That was 600,000. Indian migration, and this isn't net, it's just immigration. We don't know how many of these people are going to stay. That's running at almost 800,000. So it's higher, and that's in a period of 4 years rather than that, which was in a period of 10 years. So it's difficult to compare, but even so, we are talking about big scales here. Final thing worth noting, because a lot of people ask this, isn't it all about small boats? Well, in short, no, it's not small boats. Small boats, yes, they are at high levels, record levels actually, but the quantum here, the total number here, is about 30,000. Compare that with other routes of asylum. Compare it with those coming in from Ukraine and from Hong Kong, family members, study, work. These are the big things. It's legal migration that is the big story. And as I say, tot it all up, and you're talking about something, even as a percentage of the population, that's just totally unprecedented.
And Ed, as you've rightly pointed out, you and I remember this, 10 years ago, those top 5 countries were dominated places like Poland, Hungary, Romania. Now it's India, Nigeria, Pakistan. Do we have any sense of what impact that's having on the workplace, as in, i.e., all these migrants coming in and effectively doing the same job, just from different countries, or are they changing the type of workforce and jobs that they're doing? Do we know?
It's a great question, Darren. I'm going to try and bring up another chart since you've given me a chance to do that. Actually, a lot of people coming over from India, also even more so from China. What I've done is I've got those same numbers and just divided it. This is just the last year. Divided it by what people are doing. Actually, a lot of it. Look at the light green blue bits, the turquoise bits. That's study. So a lot of people technically are coming over to study, and some people would say, well, should you really include those in the numbers? Well, you know, there are various kind of UN rules that say ideally you should. But that is what the government is trying to reduce. I think and that is work. So there's still a lot of people coming in for work, but a lot of it is study. I think there's a question now, and we've had various reports on this in recent months, as to how many people who have come in on student visas are actually working, you know, doing kind of casual work. And it does look like it's a decent fraction of that. But the broader issue, Darren, is that, you know, a lot of these jobs, people coming in and doing the work, that's in the NHS. You know, it's social care. It's jobs that people need to do in the UK to try and keep the economy going. So there's an economic story here as well, which is to say that these people are able to find jobs and they're given decent wages and they're coming over and they're attracted by that. And to some extent, that's a positive about the UK. But some people would ask the question, what about the domestic workforce? Why aren't more people working here? So it comes back to some big and chewy questions, which is why I guess Keir Starmer wanted to talk about it today.
Yeah, really big questions. Yeah, and that's in contrast to, you know, economic inactivity in this country. And also, I think, questions, and we haven't got time, Ed, annoyingly, but about us capturing data in this country. It does seem to have slipped. There are big questions about how actually accurate the employment figures are at the moment. And it's quite significant how you can kind of effectively undercount 300,000 people is quite something. But Ed, for the moment, as always, thank you very much indeed. Ed Conway there in Westminster. Let's bring in Philip Salter. He's the founder of the Entrepreneurs Network. And we kind of want to talk about the big picture here. Ed repeatedly said this is historic. It is. We have never seen numbers like this before. It is unprecedented. Is it manageable? Is it desirable?
I think it's manageable in as much as Ed said, people are coming in with jobs, they're working in those jobs, they're being paid. They're paying a lot in fees as well. I mean, we charge both employers and employees thousands of pounds. I mean, the health surcharge, for example, went up recently from £624 to £1,000 per year. So that's just money that should be kind of ploughed into the NHS and be an advantage for all of us. So I think in effect, I think it's possible to have, you know, a decent amount of immigration. But I think the wider challenge is the economy isn't growing. People aren't feeling richer. And there's a kind of backdrop of people not liking immigration for other reasons as well. So I think there are challenges. There are, you know, and there are perhaps limits on what the British public wants, unless we get the kind of economic growth that the government's promising. As part of it.
Yeah, but Philip, it's not just about, and that you know, there's a big political argument about that, and people feel very passionate about it. I just mean from a manageable point of view, you know, 900,000 people, you know, that's a lot of housing, that's a lot of hospitals, that's potentially pressures on schools, on roads, on public transport. You know, the UK is a relatively big country population-wise, actually, but we can cope with those numbers every year without things breaking down.
We could, if we were a better run country, I think would be the...
But we're not, I suppose, Philip. We struggle to build runways and railway lines.
Well, I mean, the government's come in promising this building, and I think that, you know, there's political agreement from all the way from the left to the right that this is the number one issue. You know, we aren't building, the infrastructure is creaking. So perhaps the point is that we need to get on top of that first before we can kind of manage these sorts of numbers. But I don't think we should think, oh, we can't build stuff, we can't kind of grow as a country, which is the sign of success. Let's be clear: a growing population, whether it's cities or countries, is a sign that a country is doing well. But we shouldn't be doing that at the same time as public services going down. And yes, I think there's a lot that could be done there. I mean, remember, that's all in the hands mostly of government, and you know what I represent is entrepreneurs and businesses. So sadly, they aren't the ones that kind of at this point can kind of deliver that. Historically, they have delivered a lot of those things, of course, but the modern state doesn't allow them to.
Just finally, though, Philip, on that and talking about the country becoming wealthier and more prosperous, and you know, many people might disagree with this, but it is a reflection of a it's better people want to come here than maybe just leave. But at the same time, when you look at GDP, we had the figures last week. Per capita, it's going downwards. So yes, the country as a whole is getting wealthier because there's more people. But on an individual basis for you, I, and everyone else, it's not a great story.
Yeah, I think we've got to disentangle some things here. So, for example, we looked at the 100 fastest companies by valuation. So these are big employers, the big future large companies that are going to kind of create wealth in the country. And we found that 39% of them are started by people who are born abroad. So those entrepreneurs, for example, are the ones that are going to create the wealth, and you know, a lot of them are highly skilled jobs as well. And so I think, but maybe there are also, you know, cohorts that are less valuable and potentially even net negative. And I think we come back to that issue of data, and you know, that you discussed before I came on. I think it's important to have an honest conversation and look: are there people who come over who, you know, aren't contributing? And if not, then perhaps we need to think about technology or you know, education and other ways of kind of making sure that, you know, that isn't a net drain. But
just as in, I have to turn around. OK, Philip, we're going to have to leave it there, I'm afraid, but really appreciate your time this afternoon. Thank you very much. We're introducing Philip there, just to bring you some breaking news. You may remember last week that the remains of a baby were found in Little Hulton, and the police have just confirmed that they were of a newborn girl who they've called Ava. The cause of the death remains, according to the police, is not known to them. They are investigating. The scene is set to close apparently this weekend, and the police are appealing to Ava's mum, her family, to anyone who knows anything about what might have happened to come forward. There remains an active investigation, but the police confirming that the tragic discovery of a baby's remains last week in Little Hulton is that of a newborn baby girl who they have called Ava. We'll have more on that on the Sky News website and a little later on here on Sky News. Now, as a global sport, tennis attracts millions of viewers and many more watching on TV and online. But as an international basis, could it be much bigger? Well, today, the International Tennis Federation is reporting that more than 100 million people now regularly play the game. That's up 25% on 5 years ago, and it's looking at ways to go further. Well, the ITF president, David Hegarty, has told our sports correspondent Rob Harris about his aims and ambitions for the game.
We want tennis to look like the world, and if you look at some of the population, for instance, in Asia, there's a big population. We want to grow in Asia, in Africa. We'd love to see top players playing in, big events as well. So that's the great thing about our strategy. It's kind of focused country by country. So, one country may be in early development. They need courts, they need rackets, they need some coaching. Others may be further developed. They need more professional events. They need more, WTT events and things like that. So we tailor it based on country by country and also regionality.
Well, carrying out that interview was our sports correspondent Rob Harris, who joins us now. Rob, I'm surprised tennis numbers, and I'm going to be quite frank about this, are up so much, in the sense that all I've heard about in recent months and years, and I'm sure it's the same for some viewers at home, is about paddle rather than tennis. But tennis still sounding quite optimistic about the future.
Yes, it is one of the challenges, how tennis coexists with the rise of pickleball and paddle. For those less familiar, paddle played with glass surroundings on the court where you can use your skill to bounce the ball off those sides. But very much David Hegarty, the boss of world tennis, seeing tennis as the dominant sport still, and seeing it as very much the sole Olympic sport in terms of racket ball at the moment as well, not seeing the prospects of paddle entering the Olympics anytime soon. This report really trying to get a sense of the global state of the sport, and there are some challenges. While the numbers are up to 106 million people playing worldwide, actually most players are in 33 countries, even though the data has come from 199 nations. So you get a sense of how it's not truly global as a sport, as David Hegarty reflecting, trying to expand the participation of tennis, and also getting more Grand Slam winners, for instance, from more nations and more continents. And we did talk about the future of Grand Slams. Could there perhaps be a fifth Grand Slam no, he said, particularly as we see the rise of perhaps Saudi Arabian investment, no prospects of the kingdom gaining an event, and also that tennis having to grapple with rights issues as well, where it takes money from. But certainly seeing a healthy sport going forward, particularly in things like tennis being part of a future Olympic Games, which is actually due to be in Saudi Arabia in the coming years. But questions over the integrity of the sport. Within hours of my interview taking place, news of another major tennis drugs case with the reigning French Open champion Igor Swiatek. She failed a test. She's serving a 1-month suspension for testing positive for a heart medication known as TMZ, although the level of fault was found to be at the low end of the scale. It does come, though, not long after the former men's world #1, Yannick Sinner, also failed doping tests.
Are you a tennis or a paddle man, Rob?
Oh, I've played paddle more recently, but perhaps it's one for us to take on.
OK, Rob, thank you very much indeed. Rob Harris there, our sports correspondent. Now, does this sound familiar? Rising anger over a government planning to raise taxes and cut spending in an attempt to get the economy moving. Well, we're not talking about the UK, we're talking about France, where the minority coalition government of the Prime Minister Michel Barnier could be brought down over plans to raise €60 billion with tax rises and spending cuts in his budget. Well, joining me now is Jacob von Kierkegaard, who is a senior fellow at Bruegel at the think tank that covers European affairs. Jacob, good afternoon to you. You know what? Things economically are pretty bad at the moment, aren't they, in France?
Yes. I mean, you have obviously a combination of many things, but I think first and foremost, France is suffering the consequences of literally decades of overspending, overtaxation. And now that we have, what appears to be persistent political instability, financial markets aren't having it any longer. So you need to have a much more broad-based foundation for a longer-term recovery to start, really, in my opinion, by a much more comprehensive, longer-run deal for fiscal consolidation.
Yeah, I'm reading today that France's borrowing costs have risen above Greece's for the first time. And the problem with France is not just that it's got these enormous economic challenges, as you've rightly pointed out, but it comes in the midst of political instability, a government that could collapse at any time.
Yeah, I mean, not only do you have this unprecedented situation where you have a minority government in France, typically the president's party or a single opposition party will have a majority in parliament and can govern. The problem right now is you have three sort of groupings. You have the left, the centrist, and the right. They can't agree on anything. And therefore, you don't really have a majority on anything. And therefore, the betting was that Prime Minister Barnier would be able to negotiate some kind of budget that he would then ultimately pass through this particular provision in the French Constitution that allows budgets to pass without a vote on Parliament, but then exposes that government to a vote of no confidence. So the idea was that the far right, or Marine Le Pen's National Rally Party, would abstain from the budget, but would then also abstain from the vote of no confidence.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, and I was going to say, I mean, there's lots of reports that this could happen, as in the government could collapse, as early as next week. Jacob, for the time being, we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you very much for joining us there live in Brussels this afternoon. OK, you're watching Business Live. We're going to take a quick break. Up next, it is the markets. The FTSE barely moved today. All the details after this break.